Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Pathways to Prosperity virtual workshop series. My name is Irene Waxman. I'm the VP of Stakeholder Engagement at JVS Toronto, and I'll be moderating today's session. Welcome. Our session today is titled Newcomer Youth and Employment, Findings from a Mixed Method Study in the Greater Toronto Area. As we begin this virtual workshop, let's first take a moment to honor the ancestral grounds that we're collectively gathered on across our various regions. I and our presenters work in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This territory is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to provide a bit of context for this workshop. So the presentations you will be hearing today are based on research conducted as part of a collaborative youth employment and skills strategy, YES project, funded by IRCC. This project partners include JVS Toronto, the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, TRIAC, and Woodgreen Community Services. Since May of last year, our three organizations have been working together and with contracted research partners to better understand the challenges newcomer youth encounter in the labor market, as well as the employment-related strengths newcomer youth bring to Canada. The broader study has taken a mixed methods approach involving extensive quantitative and qualitative data collection, both primary and secondary. Each of our organizations have tried to uphold the principle of nothing about us without us. You will hear more about it in this project, by creating opportunities for youth to participate at different stages and in various ways, and you'll hear about it from our presenters as we move along. Currently, we're working on a report that consolidates findings and a set of recommendations co-designed with youth and service providers. This report will be made available later in April. Today, our presenters will share the results from select components of the study. So now we'll present our presenters briefly. So first, Sugi will provide an overview of results of a survey of GTA youth on their employment experiences. Sugi is the Research and Evaluation Manager at TRIAC, where she curates and conducts research and generates analysis on immigration, diversity and inclusion, and labor market trends. Next, Neda, JVS Toronto's Research Manager, will provide a qualitative look at newcomer youth's labor market integration in the GTA, drawing on the results of focus groups held with youth across the Toronto region. Neda has nearly 15 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and has spent the last decade working in the settlement sector, including as a previous manager of Toronto North Local Immigration Partnership. Lastly, Farzana and Alma will help us to envision the future of work from the newcomer youth perspective. Both Farzana and Alma are research and evaluation coordinators at Woodgreen. Farzana currently supports ongoing research and evaluation activities with her team and Woodgreen's Community Programs Unit. Alma has been working in the field of employment counseling and career development for the past 7 years. I'd like to remind you all to please add any questions you may have for the speakers in the Q&A box. We will get to as many questions as possible after the presentation. And if you'd like to mark the questions with a thumbs up, it will promote the question in terms of their popularity so that we could address these questions first. And I will now hand it over to Sugi.
Great. Thanks so much, Irene, and hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be presenting to you today. As Irene mentioned, my name is Sugi, and I'm the Research and Evaluation Manager at TRIAC. So for those of you who may not be familiar with TRIAC, we work in partnership with corporations, community organizations, governments, and individual supporters to champion the talent and experience that newcomers bring to the Toronto region. Our solutions support organizations to become more culturally inclusive and also help newcomers expand their professional networks and understand the local labor market. So TRIAC's study components for this collaborative YES research project included a survey of youth and an employer survey, as well as a series of validation workshops with youth and service providers. Today, I'll be focusing on the results from the survey of newcomer youth and Canadian-born youth in the Greater Toronto Area. So this component of our study was intended to better understand the experiences of newcomer youth with employment integration, the challenges that they face, as well as the employment assets that they bring and hold. We contracted R&A Malatest and Associates to conduct the survey. Fieldwork started at the end of August and it ran until mid-November. The fieldwork involved both online and in-person surveying methods. The in-person surveys were administered by 17 youth, and these youth were recruited, trained, and supported by Malatest. The survey explored several questions related to youth's employment experiences, and we'll review some of them today in this presentation. First, we'll review results related to how ready youth are for employment. We'll then take a look at youth's experiences entering the Canadian job market and how they search for work. And then lastly, we'll look at youth's experiences in Canadian workplaces. So more than 2,200 GTA youth aged 16 to 30 years participated in the survey, and the main comparison groups for the survey, as stated before, are newcomer youth and Canadian-born youth. Some of the key differences that we observed between these two groups are described in the table. In short, Canadian-born youth in the sample were typically 21 years or older. About 3/4 were post-secondary educated, and most were currently working. Meanwhile, in the newcomer youth sample, a higher proportion were in the youngest age group, so between 16 and 20 years. And this really aligns with why more newcomer respondents have been students. And also a little over half of newcomer youth were currently working. So in the survey, we asked youth to rate themselves on a set of essential skills for the workplace. The skill question had a scale from 1 to 5, from very poor to very good. And the percentages in these tables represent the proportion of participants who rated themselves positively, so a 4 or a 5 on the scale. As you can see, the proportions of positive ratings are fairly high, which suggests that most youth feel quite capable in their skills. And the ratings are significantly higher for newcomers on all skills. On average, about 7% more newcomers were rating themselves positively. So we also asked youth to think about their career plans. Overall, similar proportions of newcomer and Canadian-born youth felt that they were career ready and knowledgeable about their fields. As shown in the table, the percentage of respondents who either agree or strongly agree with each statement were within just a few points of each other. And the main difference was in the career goal statement. So a higher proportion of newcomer youth said that they had clear career goals. So next, we asked survey participants whether they knew how to search for work and apply to jobs in Canada. Here, the responses for both newcomers and Canadian-borns were not as positive. So on average, about 2/3 of youth feel that they know where to look for jobs or how to prepare an application or for an interview. Only 62% of Canadian-born youth said that they knew what resources were available to them for their job search, but this was even lower among newcomer youth. Only about half of newcomer youth felt that they were knowledgeable about available job search resources and supports. So next, we asked participants about the work experiences that they've had in Canada, both before finishing their most recent education and after graduation. So in both cases, the options were separated by paid versus unpaid work, by part-time versus full-time work, and by work that is related or unrelated to their fields of interest. Starting with the pre-graduation results, many youth born in Canada have had some form of part-time work, volunteer work, or a work placement prior to finishing school. And this includes taking on summer jobs, working during school, or between different levels of education. Overall, nearly 2/3 of Canadian-born youth were coming out of school already with work experience relevant to their fields. But this was true only for about 36% of newcomer youth respondents. And a little more than a quarter of newcomer youth hadn't had any work experience in Canada at all before graduating. Now, not surprisingly, youth were with more time in Canada seemed to gain more exposure to the workforce. all types of work experience were more common among newcomer youth who had lived in Canada for 6 to 10 years compared to those youth who'd resided in Canada for fewer years. So, since finishing their most recent education, again, many more Canadian born youth have participated in volunteer work, a part time or full time work opportunity, or a work placement. 69% of youth born in Canada have had some form of paid relevant work experience since graduating. In contrast, only about 39% of newcomers have had relevant work experience since graduating, and a quarter have not worked or volunteered in Canada at all since then. For their post graduation, significantly more Canadian born youth have been able to not just get work experience, but get work experience that's relevant to their fields of study. So we'll now turn to what youth's experiences are when they enter the Canadian job market. So overall, the time that it took youth to find their first job after graduating was quite comparable between newcomers and Canadian borns. About 60% of both groups reported that they were able to find employment within 6 months of graduating. And the distribution, as you can see from the slide, is quite similar between Canadian and born youth and newcomer youth. The differences are really in the tails of the distribution. So at one end, you have a larger share of Canadian born respondents who were able to secure a job before graduating, and then on the other end, you have a slightly larger share of newcomer youth who took more than a year to find work. So most youth identified at least one challenge with the job search. About 87% of newcomer youth and 89% of Canadian born youth respondents identified at least one job searching challenge. The table shows all of the options that were presented to survey participants. The percentages show the number of respondents who said, yes, this was a challenge for me. For newcomer youth, challenges included those common to all immigrants, namely the devaluation of non-Canadian work experience by employers and having a small professional or social network in Canada. The most common challenges among Canadian-born respondents were lacking relevant education or experience and not having enough available jobs in their areas of study. So next we asked newcomer youth if any of the assets listed on the slide has helped them when they were searching for work. Nearly all, 94% of newcomer youth identified at least one of these as something that helped them during their job search. The most frequently identified asset was their ability to cope or adapt. Over half of newcomer respondents identified this as a strength. This was followed by education and being fluent in another language. So youth were also asked about the approaches and methods they had used to help them look for work, and we found some striking differences between the two groups. So for newcomer youth, the job searching approach that was the most frequently used was online job applications, with 57% of all newcomers indicating the use of this approach. The difference in use between the two groups was about 20 percentage points. About half of both newcomer and Canadian born youth reported searching for work through friends and family. However, significantly more Canadian born youth appealed to their professional networks to find work than did newcomer youth. To find work, Canadian born youth were also much more likely than newcomer youth to have used an employment or career center or to have participated in a work placement program through their school. So in the survey, we also asked participants to indicate which of the approaches that they had selected in the previous question to be the most effective for them. So for newcomer youth, the most effective job searching approaches were online job applications, friends or family, or their professional networks. But in comparison, Canadian-born youth most frequently selected both friends and family, followed by employment or career center services and online job apps. So next, for the approach that they selected as most effective, respondents were asked to explain how that approach helped them. So for all of the approaches, both newcomer youth and Canadian-born youth indicated that their chosen approach helped them find a job, helped them to find a job specifically matching their qualifications, or improved their professional or occupational skills. Some youth also associated certain approaches with building self-confidence and improving their essential skills. So for example, some respondents who used their friends or family cold contacting or online job applications to apply for jobs said that this helped build their self-confidence. And respondents who used employment centers, staffing agencies, work placements, or courses and certifications said that it helped build their essential skills. So 21% of newcomer youth and 34% of Canadian-born respondents selected an employment support as their most effective job searching approach. And the types of employment supports considered are listed on the slide. The survey asked those respondents who selected one of these employment supports as their most effective approach to indicate what they liked about it. So youth, both newcomers and Canadian born, most often liked that these services had friendly and helpful people, that the services met their individual needs, or that it helped them to find jobs suitable for their qualifications. On the flip side, of those who had worked in Canada or previously looked for work in Canada, 62% of newcomer respondents and 53% of Canadian born respondents had not used a professional employment support like career counseling or job search assistance at all. And the top reasons as to why they didn't use these services included because they weren't aware of them, because they didn't know how to access them, or they thought that these services wouldn't be helpful or useful for them. This was the same for both Canadian born and newcomer youth. However, newcomer youth were significantly more likely than Canadian born youth to say that they are not aware of services. And Canadian born youth were more likely to say that they don't need these services to find a job. Now, going back to those who did use employment services, we asked them for their opinion on how these services could be improved. Among newcomer youth, common recommendations included wanting more supports for specific groups or demographics, such as newcomers, having more or better job opportunities available, and providing clients with more training or opportunities to gain experience. And this is really speaking to wanting service providers to have better connections with employers to facilitate work placements. Among Canadian born youth, common suggestions included, again, having more or better job opportunities and having more supports for youth in general, for students and as well as for recent graduates. Youth were also asked to evaluate the quality of their most recent work experiences in Canada. And as before, these percentages represent positive responses, that is selecting either a 4 or a 5 on a 5-point scale. And there are a couple of things to highlight here. First, most responses are only between 40 to 60% positive, which indicates that youth are not very satisfied with many aspects of their job. And second, newcomer youth might be in lower quality jobs or were less satisfied with the jobs that they were in at the time of the survey. Aspects of the job, such as pay, benefits, paid time off, work life balance, opportunities for growth, as well as opportunities for learning and development, were rated positively by a larger share of Canadian born youth than newcomer youth. Overall, about 66% of newcomer youth rated their last job positively, compared to about 75% of Canadian born youth. Finally, we asked youth about whether they had experienced any sort of discrimination in any of their workplaces in Canada. The proportions of newcomer and Canadian born youth who said yes was similar, so 32% and 37% respectively overall. Both groups reported experiencing discrimination for their ethnicity, for their culture, or their race. However, significantly more newcomer youth mentioned experiencing discrimination due to their ethnicity, and significantly more newcomers also reported facing discrimination because of their language or accent. So in summary, newcomer youth have confidence in their essential workplace skills and career plans, and they identified a number of personal assets that might help with their job search. But newcomer youth recognize that some weaknesses exist in their job seeking know how, and relative to Canadian born youth, they seem to lack field relevant work experience. To help them find work, many newcomer youth have not used employment services, in part because they are not familiar with them. Among those with work experiences, newcomer youth's most recent job may have been lower quality relative to their Canadian born counterparts. And then finally, workplace discrimination seems to be experienced by both newcomers and Canadian borns. So we are currently in the process of finalizing a set of recommendations on how to improve newcomer youth's labor market integration processes, informed not just by this survey, but by all of the different study components under this project. But having said that, the results from the survey alone suggest that youth would benefit from such things as a better pre-employment supports to develop job search skills, more effective outreach for them to learn of the employment-related services available to them and how they can be accessed, services that are more responsive to the diverse individual needs of youth, opportunities to gain relevant work experience as well in school, and finally, more information on how to recognize and deal with workplace discrimination. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Netta.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this presentation will offer a qualitative look at newcomer youth's labor market integration in the GTA. So a little bit about JVS Toronto. Since 1947, JVS Toronto has empowered people to maximize their potential by providing job search support, career counseling, training, and recruitment services across 9 locations in Toronto and York Region. So to offer an overview of this part of the research project, youth were recruited to participate in focus groups after completing the qualitative research component carried out by TRIAC in the form of a survey. The focus groups allowed us to delve deeper into the question around the employment-related assets, barriers, and needs of newcomer youth. JVS contracted 2 consulting firms to conduct focus group discussions with newcomer youth who participated in the survey commissioned by TRIAC. A phenomenology methodology was used to establish a collective understanding of newcomer experiences in entering the labor market and accessing employment-related services. In addition to focus groups, JVS also conducted key informant interviews with individuals who had in-depth knowledge on the employment issues facing youth. We also set up a youth advisory committee. A group of youth were trained in community-based research and were involved in the design of focus group discussions. As a part of their training, participants were familiarized with research methods and approaches. They participated in mock focus groups and offered feedback in terms of the questions, and actually observed focus groups and offered observations to the researchers. So to offer just a breakdown of the participants, as you can see here, a total of 115 youth participated across 23 focus groups, and you'll see the age breakdown on the side of the screen. So looking at the key questions that we were trying to gain insight into. So these included, what are the assets of newcomer youth in employment integration? What barriers do newcomer youth face in finding and retaining employment? How prepared are newcomer youth to enter the workforce? How do newcomer youth learn and make decisions about their careers, and who influences them? How do community and family make a difference in the transition to employment? And finally, how do newcomer youth see available employment-related services and programs as valuable channels to develop their employment readiness skills and prepare them for successful workforce integration? So in looking at the aspirations and influences, respondents spoke to a number of factors. First, was their careers and experiences before immigrating. So for those who have an area of work, their goals and aspirations were an extension of what they were already doing back home, only with more scope. So for example, seniority or authority gained over time. Salary, a need for an income, a desire for a decent or good or high salary was a powerful motivator. Family, so the family influenced not only what they wanted to do, so future career choices, but then also offered a path of what particular careers could be open to them. So for example, if the family had a business back home, this influenced the youth to want to do that now here in Canada. Entrepreneurship, so many noted wanting to be engage in business or be entrepreneurs, and also this area of having a side hustle. So either being an influencer or engaging in real estate was also noted as something that they aspired to. And finally, contributing to the betterment of society. So connecting to the needs that they see and the struggles that they went through as youth, and how that can then be of assistance to others. And this quote from one of the participants really highlights how life experiences are a source of motivation and inspiration. This participant said, "I experienced the life of being a refugee child. We go through a lot of difficulties. Getting food sometimes is hard. If you're lucky enough, you can have like 1 or 2 meals a day. Some people go without a meal in a day. I really want to change that situation. Plus also the education system. Some refugee children don't get the opportunity to attend higher level education." We went on to ask what the youth felt, how the youth felt they were prepared to enter the workforce. So for those that said they were prepared, they cited existing experiences, family support, being currently in school, so either in high school or post-secondary, or being currently employed, that since they had entered the labor market, they felt that that would begin to prepare them to continue. For those that felt that were not prepared to enter the workforce, many cited a lack of connections and networks, so feeling isolated and needing mentors to assist them on their employment journey. Soft skills was also noted, so needing communication skills to be developed, understanding workplace norms, or how to be a professional in Canada. System navigation and foreign credentials were also cited. So in terms of formal credentials, this included, of course, the lack of Canadian experience, a lack of recognition of their credentials, and the high cost of certification. So what youth noted that they needed to be prepared was soft skills development. So communication skills, public speaking skills, time management skills, job search skills, which included interviewing skills and resume writing, and finally, networking and mentorship. So the youth were also asked to describe what they felt their assets were. And, there was a diverse array of assets that were shared, and they fell into a few categories. One was resilience. So the quality of resilience that is formed also out of the process of immigration. Interpersonal skills, that they felt that they could really connect with many types of people, that they were multilingual or bilingual, that they are team players, and they were quick learners. The younger cohort, so those that were between 16 to 19, had the most difficulty articulating specific assets they bring to their employment future. As a group, they seem not to have yet developed a perspective on themselves and their strengths as individuals, nor significant understanding of what employment requires and how they are equipped to succeed. Participants in the older cohort who were on a career path tended to first talk about their professional qualifications, the technical skills that they may have had from back home. I think one quote highlights the assets that are developed as a result of being a newcomer youth. This participant went on to say, "I am highly optimistic and also a self-motivated person. Any particular hardship of life that I've been going through in the past or in the present as well, I still keep on saying to myself that if you have self-motivation and you do the work with perseverance and diligently, everything is going to be coming your way. There is always light at the end of the tunnel." So now I'm thinking about the barriers. Participants identified barriers that fell into several categories. First was, again, Canadian experience and foreign credentials. The requirement of Canadian experience delays youth's entry into their professions and often drives them into minimum wage jobs and depresses their earning potential. This also includes a lack of recognition of foreign credentials and experiencing long processing times and transferring credentials. Knowledge gaps were also identified. So this might be greater English or French language proficiency, knowing where and how to find jobs, knowing the technology to find jobs, how employment services work, where they are, and knowing how Canada in general works, so housing, taxes, transit. Participants also noted a lack of networks. So really, and I'll speak about this later on, but like leaving your networks that you had back home and now really starting from scratch. Personal circumstances were also cited. So this includes challenges in terms of accessing internet, family responsibilities when one is the only English speaker, and caring for children while working or studying without family support, and the high cost of childcare. And finally, participants noted facing discrimination. So this was felt because of having an unusual name and accent, not being able to speak English in the same way as Canadians, being Black, being a woman and also a person of color, wearing a hijab and learning and living in certain neighborhoods. There's one of the participants shared, they said, "I think employers are most looking for your Canadian experience. And I already did a lot of interviews, but what I can realize is they're not looking for passion and ability to give your best." So now I'm thinking about retaining and advancing in careers. So focus group participants were asked to comment on what would make them stay at a job and what would make them leave. The answers were wide-ranging, but not surprising. Based on the most numerous responses, employers that retain newcomer youth will provide opportunities for growth and a career path and create a good working environment, which has several facets, which includes fostering a collaborative and supportive climate and paying good wages. Managers with negative qualities or toxic work environments, as described by the youth, prevent employers from retaining newcomer youth. We also went on to ask what the role of family and community was in helping youth enter the workforce or integrate. Family was seen as a source of support, emotional, financial, in some cases, a path for employment. Others noted the demands of family life. And I think this quote from one of the participants really highlights this idea of that being a newcomer youth in a family is also at times quite demanding. This person said, "The situation right now is kind of hard for newcomers. You have to handle your family. You have to figure out everything. The only example I can give you, the buses. Right now, we don't have a car. Like I have to take my mom and my dad. If they want to go somewhere, I have to take them by bus. So, these youth are the translators for their families. They are the system navigators. They are the mode of transportation. They really play a vital role in supporting the family. In terms of community, focus group participants recognize the importance of being a part of a community, which included networks, communities of shared identity. For example, in terms of ethnic communities, focus group participants reported the benefits of being connected to their communities in terms of helping them feel like home. They were back home again. And of course, the communities that are created. So many noted that, that they saw this importance of being a part of a community, but they didn't know where to find one. So they had to really make effort to create one around them. And many noted the challenges in finding a community. Several participants still were not able to connect with either a network, a community based on their school, their profession, their ethnicity. And they reported sustained feelings of being alone or on their own because they have little or no community around them. We then went on to explore what their engagement with employment-related services were. So engagement was influenced by where a newcomer youth was in their career journey and their age. Employment services seem to have the greatest impact for those who need assistance with resumes, interview skills, and basic job search skills. Lack of knowledge, like Sugi had mentioned, or a misunderstanding of the purpose of services and a desire to navigate the labor market independently were cited as reasons for not accessing employment. So for example, some youth thought that it costs to access services and they didn't know it was for free. Or really this thing that I had said around a desire to navigate the labor market independently, this kind of notion that I have to be able to do it on my own and make it on my own. So we went on to ask what youth wanted from employment services. And again, what they shared kind of fell into these four categories that I'll describe a little bit. One was opportunities that build experience and network. So one of the biggest losses in immigrating to a new country is leaving behind your own and your family's network. Participants in the focus groups keenly felt that loss in many cases and are eager to build networks in Canada that can support their employment aspirations and success. Among those specifically named as beneficial from employment services were networking skills and advice, along again with resumes, assistance and interviewing skills. However, participants also reported being frustrated that networking events arranged by settlement or employment services usually focused on entry-level jobs, and they often met no one in their chosen field if they had with those credentials or degrees. Mentorship. Mentorship in this context really was a structured relationship with someone who is in your field or in your career or where you would like to actually go that provides this type of guidance. And mentorship was seen by focus groups as most concretely useful when the mentor was the right fit. So, for example, in their chosen fields. And there was a structure to that relationship with meeting schedules, a practical agenda, and helping them navigate the various elements of the employment journey, again, from references to interview preparation to sharing their experiences. And people propose greater efforts being built to build up the supply of mentors, including growing mentorship programs by enlisting and broadening the scope of who is recruited. Additionally, engaging people who have been through employment services and now have a career path so that can then mentor others. So really tapping into that pool of those that have already walked this journey before them that can now turn around and help others. Appropriate bridging programs. So bridging programs that help foreign trained professionals bring their existing professional credentials to the standard required for work in Canada are seen as valuable, but hard to find. Finding the right information at the right time is crucial. Co-ops and internships. So co-ops and internships are considered helpful were considered helpful by participants because they provide experience that helps people decide on career choices and options. However, these are hard options to choose for older participants and anyone else who must earn money now because they're unpaid usually. Further, some participants have been frustrated because co-ops or internships may not lead anywhere. They reported a pattern or an experience witnessed by their families where a co-op placement is followed by an internship, both unpaid, And then the individual is released by the company, which says that they cannot afford to hire them. And this has led to feelings of exploitation. So in terms of now my closing remarks, I think again, like the research project in full will be able to consolidate the findings and the recommendations. But just coming out of these focus groups, we can see that services need to be better promoted to newcomer youth. We need to have individualized and customized employment programs. There is a need to connect youth to a wider network and communities, to educate the public and employers on hiring newcomer youth and the assets they bring to the table. And finally, leveraging the skills of youth in the process of helping them integrate into the labor market. I'll now pass it on to Farzana, who will speak to Wood Green's area of work in relation to the future of work.
Thank you, Neda. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, Alma and I will try to envision the future of work from a newcomer youth's perspective. Both Alma and I are the research coordinators at Wood Green Community Services. So before going into the details of the research findings, a little overview of Wood Green. Our vision is a Toronto where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Our mission is to enhance self-sufficiency, promote well-being, and reduce poverty through innovative solutions to critical social needs. Every year, we serve about 37,000 clients from our 36 locations in Toronto. Our 750 staffs run 75 different programs. This makes Wood Green one of the largest social service providers in Toronto, serving for over 85 years. So Wood Green has long experience and expertise providing employment support services to youth. Many of our youth clients are newcomer. Youth and future of work are two of Wood Green's strategic pillars. And YES Research Project gave us an opportunity to better understand the factors affecting the future of work, particularly for newcomer youth in the GTA. So to better understand the future of work for newcomer youth, here at Wood Green, we have carried out several research components. We conducted a thorough literature review on future of work. We reviewed 46 published documents, categorized future of work trends in considering political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. We call them PESTEL. Also keeping in mind the societal, technological, economic, environmental, political, and value-based factors, or STEP V. So it's a combination of PESTEL and STEP V conceptual framework that we have used in the literature review to summarize or to categorize the findings. We also conducted 4 institutional interviews with agencies showcasing new innovative models of youth employment programming. We followed appreciative inquiry approach and trained 8 newcomer youths as youth researchers. These youths interviewed senior leaders of these agencies. We also did 4 discussion groups with newcomer youths representing different demographic groups. We will talk more about this later in the presentation. Also 6 key informant interviews with employers and educators who work closely with newcomer youth. We talked to them. We conducted agency mapping exercise with 10 agencies of different sizes in the GTA to understand the best practices for delivering newcomer youth employment programs in the GTA. While future of work literature review allowed us to understand the future trends in the labor market, discussion group findings showed us what assets and barriers newcomer youths have that potentially lead them towards or pull them back from reaching towards their aspired career or job in the future. By analyzing findings from these 2 components, the future of work literature review and discussion group, we tried to understand how can newcomer youth be better prepared to meet the demands of the future workforce. Now a little bit of methodologies we applied. We collected qualitative data through all our research components. While doing the discussion group, we followed vision journey exercise to lead the conversation. With this exercise, newcomer youth participants described their present work or employment situation. They imagine their aspired future career where they want to be, maybe in 5 or 10 years from now. Then they drew a roadmap identifying their opportunities and enablers that will lead them to their aspired career in the future. They also identified challenges and constraints that may pull them back from reaching to their aspired career goals. While talking about all these stages, newcomer youth also compared how their situation is different from that of a Canadian-born youth. To recruit participants for these discussion groups, we used postcards, social media campaign. You can see the postcard right here. Our youth ambassadors also recruited discussion group participants as well. Newcomer youths who participated in the discussion groups were between 16 to 13 years of old. They landed in Canada up to 10 years ago. They were 13-year-old or older when they arrived in Canada. They had functional English proficiency to understand instructions and the materials of the discussion group. The 4 discussion groups we conducted were with all female participants, with NEET group, not in education or employment or training, with younger cohort of newcomer aged between 16 to 20, and then there was a mixed newcomer youth discussion group. The findings allowed us to understand newcomer youth's vision about their future career or employment in Canada. Next slide. So now looking at into the future of work. Before COVID-19, we saw some trends that had higher potentials to impact the future of employment or the labor market. So we see that technological changes such as artificial intelligence had impacted and influenced every industry. Virtual and augmented reality transform the way we engage with things like experiences or trainings or meetings. Blockchain adoption changed the security and authenticity of bank transactions or high value goods, insurance and votings. And of course, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple are redefining the technology industry and dominating multiple markets at this moment. Globalization also played a great role. So with globalization, Canada is using creative mechanisms to address a tech talent shortage. So we see more tech talented immigrants are entering in Canada these days. We see demographic change. We are seeing retirement of seniors in one hand, and on the other hand, many seniors are working well into their 80s. People are connected but are lonely. We see mental illness widespreading alongside technological connections. Trends in lifelong learning and also separation of personal and professional life becoming very blurred these days. Environmental sustainability, resource scarcity in one side, and then there's possibilities of experimental or sustainable energy sources to provide abundant, affordable energy for all. We see surge in climate refugees in Canada. Due to this disappearing middle class, we see increasing inequality, increasing polarization between rich and poor, decline of capitalism. Millennials are pushing for a new economic system to replace capitalism. Political uncertainty is a reality now. And then there are other factors such as entrepreneurial spirit or creative or social media savviness are becoming employable skills in the labor market. Now, some of these trends continue to dominate the labor market in the post-COVID world as well. Top of these trends are related to our lives online, decline of capitalism, over-reliance on technologies, that is artificial intelligence or augmented reality, blockchain, etc. With Generation Z entering the labor market, expectations have shifted. So work-life balance or meaningful work or employee well-being are some of the top rating issues that both employees are looking for, and the employers need to assure those qualities as well. So going into the next slide, please. So now what's in the future for newcomer youth? So these images that you can see on this slide are parts of the vision journey exercise drawings from our discussion group participants. If you can read that from the picture on top right, we see that they're skeptical about their future. The participant writes, likely the newcomer will be in the same industry that they started in. Canadian borns are more likely to advance more. And we can also see the word depression seeps into the picture for this individual. Some youths are optimistic about future, especially those who are going to school Aspirations and ambitions make them hopeful. We also see mixed impression. Considering the economic outlook, this may not be the best time to be in Canada. It's hard for everyone right now. So with this, I'm now handing over to my colleague Alma to discuss the rest of the findings.
Thank you, Farzana. As the last presenter, one thing that I wanted to highlight is the ongoing collaboration, not only with JVS Toronto and TRIAC, something that has been so valuable and has certainly multiplied the voices of newcomer youth, but more importantly, the dialogue and participation of the youth themselves, incorporating components like the discussion and focus groups, capacity building workshops, and validation groups that have constantly informed the work we've done on the YES research project over the last few months. As we've already heard today in all conversations we've held, employers, educators, and service agencies agree how newcomer youth bring many assets to the workforce. And these on the slide are some of the ones the youth themselves identify as skills, experience, knowledge, and especially personal attributes. Personal attributes they possess as they begin their immigrant journey. Their ability to interact and connect with others, as you can see here, a lot of the time out of pure necessity, as we'll see later. Professionalism, resilience, many point to how their ability to deal with roadblocks and challenges they encounter does equip them with the ability to handle things such as discrimination compared to Canadian-born youth. Speaking two or more languages has also been seen as a skill, and moving to Canada is seen as an opportunity to start fresh and achieve something. Common themes that surfaced in our conversations, how as they immediately arrive to Canada, especially those who come as students or they come alone, they don't have any social networks. And we've heard it throughout the presentation today, and they will very likely begin to build them all from scratch. That initial journey navigating, networking, and finding social supports as newcomers can be crucial in setting the stage for their integration into Canadian society, whether it's going to school for languages or reskilling, upskilling, or starting the job search process. We've all heard, not just today, but I'm sure in other places, about the challenges in validating educational documents and credentials. This roadblock can prolong for a long time and may at times seem unsurmountable, causing many of the youth to give up or just start a new career altogether. A lot of insight came up when it came to what supports exist for newcomer youth, whether from their families, networks, their own ethnic communities, or society in general. As we've heard today, the sometimes difficult journey of finding their first job in Canada, many a time having to start off with precarious employment. The catch-2020 here is that precarious employment may work against them because of how it looks on their resume, sometimes perceived by employers as a complete break in their careers. Discussions about what agency supports exist, and as we have already heard today, a lot of the times not even knowing that they do exist was a big part of the conversation. We heard about the importance of general well-being and mental health supports for newcomer youth, and how this has a direct effect on the job-seeking journey, and especially insights on what wraparound supports exist or are needed in the future. Because we were intentionally using an appreciative inquiry methodology paired up with a vision board exercise, we discuss at length those things that newcomer youth already possess that can make the journey easier. Discussing assets, whether in terms of skills or personality, allowed us to also guide the dialogue towards speaking of strategies that can be implemented when encountering barriers and challenges when looking for a job. Some of the challenges and barriers that we encountered in the conversations. One of the things that was interesting about our conversation around racism and classism in Canada, and one that I personally related to, was how newcomer youth during pre-arrival idealize life in Canada, a lot of the times based on how things are portrayed on TV or media, then arriving and finding a stark difference to the reality that BIPOC, especially BIPOC populations experience. This theme came up a few times. In the newcomer youth view, because their experiences are so different from those born in Canada, when it comes to job search, most perceive as unfair competition with an assistant that mainly caters to those who are born in Canada and go to school here, or who have their first jobs right after high school, for instance, or after graduation. The advantages, they said, are many, regardless of what credentials and experience newcomer youth bring to the table. Needless to say, facing the reality of the immigration journey can lead to growing frustrations, disappointment, self-doubt, and depression, and can in fact push newcomer youth to those who prey on the vulnerable and who take advantage of the situation. The longer the job search takes, the more it takes a toll on young immigrants. And this came up in the, especially the conversation with the NEED group. We saw it in the rise of these NEED participants, not in education, employment, or training. And in fact, we had conversations on how to give an honest and vivid account on a report that has to be submitted to our funder. How do you translate on paper the vacant look on someone's eyes when the experience of finding work in Canada has been so negative that they have even given up on their desire to even talk about it? We heard a silence. There was silence in that group, especially. That it's sometimes years of unsuccessful job search that they even start second guessing their decision to come to Canada. That for some, that experience is exacerbated by the ongoing challenge of patiently waiting for their permanent resident or convention refugee status for the documents to arrive. The continued roadblocks dealing with credential evaluation for those who went to school in their home countries, those who have family responsibilities and commitments in Canada and or abroad, in addition to those challenges mentioned above. Just to illustrate some of the point participants in the discussion groups raised, here are some quotes, and there are many more in our final reports as we try to include many firsthand accounts and excerpts from the discussions we had. Those voices kept, informing the research. Their direct accounts, as in this quote, highlight the importance to support newcomers' ethnic communities as the first point of contact upon arrival for those entering Canada. Hearing success stories from newcomers' own ethnic communities, how they provide immediate and relevant guidance to assist those who experience culture shock, feeling confused, isolated, fearful in some cases, upon first arriving in Canada, especially for those who come on their own. Members of these ethnic communities can also serve as role models and provide valuable networking opportunities, information, guidance, mentoring as we've heard today. They give the newcomer a sense that they can achieve anything, or they have the potential to do that. They be a safety net, provide protection in a way, and also help combat loneliness and provide a way to connect to the larger group. On the other hand, as the second quote shows, they can also play a negative first experience if they refer newcomer youth to entry-level survival jobs and precarious employment, boxing them in instead of encouraging them to dream and set better, albeit realistic goals for the future, for their future in Canada. This quote here alludes to the fact, the first one, alludes to the fact that just like it is trendy to push for DEI efforts in the workplace, there needs to be a push for hiring newcomers as well. And maybe, why not make it a trend? Make this, this initiative a trend. Employer service providers and educators, when working on their own or in partnerships, should hold themselves and each other accountable in order to push for strong and constant diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that includes hiring newcomer youth for suitable roles. Also, very important in the future of work is encouraging partners to engage equity-seeking group members and newcomers specifically for visibility and representation, something we heard across the board. The second quote reflects the importance, especially in the early stages, of engaging newcomers earlier in their Canadian settlement journey and providing better wraparound support services that already exist, such as financial support, logistics, and childcare, mental health and wellness, so that newcomers get to be, and this is also a direct quote, in a community that gives you the chance to be yourself, express yourself, and aim for higher goals. And finally, and as I mentioned before, those very early days when immigrating to Canada can be the building blocks of how positive or negative the next few months will be. I don't know how to emphasize this enough, as it was one of the most moving things we heard in those conversations, especially because for some of us, our own journey as new immigrants happened so long ago that we forget that those first few months, weeks and months were and felt like. spending time waiting, idle, with nothing to do. This is actually words that we heard in those conversations: idle, nothing to do, in shelters. Even harder for those who are alone. It can be frustrating, depressing, and they may fall into negative experiences, like I mentioned before, given the disconnect in how the journey shapes up. Credential recognition, waiting for immigration documents, waiting to go to school and apply for jobs, a vicious cycle, really. This is where newcomer youth end up having a lot of time on their hands. A strategy suggested was doing intentional and aggressive outreach in spaces where newcomers frequent on the first few days to disseminate information about available programs. Some examples given included flyers in airports and shelters. Also target shelters and spaces where newcomers frequent while awaiting decisions from IRCC in order to bring them into the fold as early as possible, to avoid having, as one of the youth so eloquently put it, a wall of redundancy built, which takes away the willingness to do anything. Waiting too long can be draining, leaving the newcomer alone with their problems, consuming them and making them more prone to negative behaviors and actions. This is the point where they seek service providers with the necessary wraparound services. Successful models, based on what we heard, focus not on deficit models, what the youth lack, but that are instead asset-based, youth-centered, holistic, built with cultural humility and trauma-informed approaches, and chock full with empathy. That actually goes hand in hand with our conversations with employers, educators, and service providers, most agreeing how newcomers have enormous potential, a drive to succeed, motivation, they're hungry, they have great credentials and experience, and hope to be given a chance to showcase their talents and competencies, maybe via placements, co-ops, internships, work integrated learning, a lot of this, talk of will, having the support of mentors and efforts like that, like those. These are only a few highlights and key points of the YES research. Much more came out in all the work that's been done over the past few months. And like my colleagues mentioned, incredibly rich insights on the final report. And with that, I will send it back to Irene. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much to our presenters, to Sugi, Neda, Farzana, and Alma. So this concludes the presentation part, and I just wanted to highlight to our audience that the vast amount of data gathered for this research from 3 different perspectives, both statistical and key informant interviews and qualitative data analysis, as well as deeper look into the future of work, highlights the perspective. First and foremost, the approach of this research was engaging youth in this process and really sharing their experiences. And as you can hear, all these very moving reflections from what newcomer youth are going through. And Alma, you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter how many times we hear about it, and when we went through this ourselves, and people in our network who went through this, when you have it in a form of a research where you can really look into these experiences and how time goes by, but these experiences still remain and the problems still persist. And another overarching, I guess, element for me was not only the importance of engaging youth in the programming, but also addressing the gap between the accessibility of services for Canadian-born youth versus newcomer youth. And we have a few questions around that, and we will get right to the questions. But the idea of how can we be more effective in informing newcomer youth about the services that exist, and also engage newcomer youth in creation of more effective services that address their needs, and that not only from the employment perspective, not only focus on getting them a job, but helping them build a career, have an aspiration for a future for themselves, and having a plan of action, as opposed to just pushing youth into a job and leaving it there. So again, I'd like to thank all of our presenters today. I think you all did a wonderful job, and we can see it in the comments that we're getting in the Q&A portion. So we will get right to the questions, and there are a few questions that were coming up as Sugi was speaking. So first of all, a question to Sugi: were you able to ask the participants about their field of employment including whether it was a well-paying job or an hourly wage position?
Great. Thank you so much for the question. The short answer is that we didn't ask that directly in the survey. So we wanted to keep the survey to a fairly manageable length of less than 15 minutes, and we had quite a bit of ground to cover. So we were quite selective in the questions we asked there. But that said, youth that participated in focus groups that JVS held did speak quite extensively about their careers and their current occupations. And what we saw in that data is that these employment experiences are quite diverse. So everything from being an accountant to a software engineer or financial advisor to working in retail or the food service industries. I should mention also that the youth that were drawn for the focus groups, as Neda had said, came from the survey participants. So these are, there's quite a bit of overlap between the different study components in terms of who we heard from. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, and just as a follow-up to that question, was the data in your presentation not impacted by the difference in age between newcomer and non-newcomer youth? Because the difference in the level of positions could have been affected by that.
Yeah, so that's right. I did mention that there were a higher proportion of youth that were aged 16 to 20 years and a lower proportion aged 21 to 25 amongst newcomer youth. But the mean age didn't differ between newcomer and Canadian-born youth. And among both groups, both newcomers and Canadian-born, the vast majority were over 21 years old. So on average, we don't think that the overall results were influenced by the slight differences in ages.
Okay. If any of our other panelists have any other input in terms of the differences between different age groups, or there's another question here, the gap between education and employment for newcomer youth specifically, as they're more likely to be students but less likely to be employed compared to Canadian-born youth. What factors, in your opinion, contribute to this gap, and what steps can organizations and government take to address it? Again, I guess this is a question for Sugi because it addresses the research part.
For sure, I can start with the response, and I welcome my colleagues at JVS and Wood Green to jump in with their thoughts as well. So drawing from the survey results, we did see that newcomer youth are more likely than Canadian-born youth to come out of school without any field-relevant work experience. So just going back to the numbers, about 36% of newcomer youth had work experience at the time of graduation, but this was compared to about 65% of Canadian-born youth. So this could be one of the contributing factors. And as Neda explained in her presentation, more opportunities for workplaces and for co-op opportunities that have pathways to longer term employment could be quite helpful here. In the employer survey that we also conducted as part of this study, hiring managers did express that having targeted incentives or subsidies for hiring newcomer youth would be helpful for facilitating this. The other contributing factors aren't really drawn from the survey results. They'd be a bit more speculative in nature. But one factor could be that newcomers come from less financially secure households and may need to take jobs after graduation that come immediately rather than necessarily holding out for jobs in areas that are aligned with their fields of study or their preferred career interest. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll allow my colleagues from JVS or Wood Green to sort of jump in based on reflections from their study components.
Sure, thank you, Sugi. Farzana?
Yes, so I just wanted to add to this note is that the skills development program for newcomer youth that actually helps, especially those have a built-in job placement component in it, because it gives the newcomer youth the Canadian experience that employers are looking for, and which is often lacking thing for them. And well, actually, we are still working on the recommendations, so I can't really comment on that. But during our discussion group or during our conversation with key informants and the agencies, we have heard that maybe government or the policymakers, there is an it is the time that employers should be encouraged to hire newcomers, like having immigrants not only at the entry level positions, but also in the leadership roles is important. And discussion group participants actually mentioned that we want to see immigrants in those leading roles, leadership roles. So these kinds of gives us hope that, okay, at one point we can also be in those positions, and we can look up to them, and we can be inspired, get inspired. So these days every employer wants to be diversified, so maybe hiring new immigrants could be another way of being diversified, and that could be a motto for employers, like we hire new immigrants. Could be something that could be worked on. So again, we can't provide any concrete recommendations at this moment because we are still working on those, but these are some of the findings that we had through the discussions.
Thank you, Farzana. Anyone else wants to add to this?
Again, like just what Sugi was saying, like anecdotally, but even just looking at what we heard in terms of from the youth, but then also the key informant interviews, what seemed to come up over and over and over again was this idea of mentorship networks, mentorship networks. So also we just to think like how all these elements of what they are saying are their needs and their barriers also may affect, for example, then being able to be employed after they graduate. And one of the focus group participants just spoke so highly of their mentor, and one of the reasons why they spoke so highly was that they were trying to help them connect with jobs. So that they said, my mentor told me, go onto my LinkedIn and look at everyone that I'm connected to, and who do you want to connect to, and I will make that introduction for you to then help you find work. So I think also connecting some of the things that we heard so overwhelmingly in terms of the need for networking and mentorship.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If I can also add to that, the other thing with that is also that newcomer youth as a pathway to employment go back to education, upskilling, reskilling. And so this is a way for them to try to break into the workforce, into the job market. So that may work against them because they continue to be, students and not having that elusive Canadian experience. So I think that the models with key informants and with all employers that we saw were successful were the ones that had programming that allowed them to not look for precarious employment, but for jobs that were, directly related with their credentials from back home.
Absolutely. So, there is a common theme here that we all want, and our participants as well, we all want newcomer youth to get access to these services. We want them as much as possible to have mentors, to have positive role models, to have a plan, to have career support. And it seems from the research that there is still lack of information and lack of uptake on these employment supports, specifically for newcomer youth. Do you have any insight to share on how we can better promote it, how we can better engage? What are the steps for us, as a community to take so that we can increase the uptake on the services for newcomer youth? In no particular order, whoever wants to.
One of the things, and I mentioned it in my bit, was the outreach model, because and we've had this conversation with Nera, with Prasanna, with Sugi as we were working on this, is the ones that may be needing the services the most are not coming to the service provider. So how do we change the model? And this is something that we heard in the discussion groups a lot, is how do we reach out to them and help them, because if they're not coming, we're not able to help them. So the outreach model has to change. And they mentioned, having flyers at the airports, maybe coming to the shelters, maybe, like changing that, the settlement worker, like we're not going to go there. There's got to be a way that, we can reach out to them.
Great. Anyone else?
Also, just to add a little bit to what Alma said, and this also came in the discussion that we had with Neda and Sugi, and some of the findings from the workshop is that sometimes newcomer youth do not want to access these services because they think that it's free service or I'm not paying for it. So it's it's something I'm not entitled to. But then there is this, like these services are offered free, but we are paying, like everyone, we are paying through our taxes for this program. So it's, even though it seems free, it's not something that we are not paying for. So these are the messages that has to be out there for newcomer youths to be willing to accepting these services and enrolling into these programs as well.
I can add just one more point to that. So we didn't explore this question really deeply through the survey, but we have been holding a series of validation workshops with youth and service providers as a last step in the project. And I'll just go through quickly a few of the things that we heard from them. So one thing that youth mentioned is that sharing information about employment-related services really starts with pre-arrival information. So one youth participant in the validation workshops who'd recently arrived had mentioned that in the orientation that he had before coming to Canada, the sort of information that was provided wasn't necessarily helpful for him to know where to look for jobs or where to start in terms of going to get the resources and guidance that he needs. We also heard that there could be, better systems of referral and connections between agencies so that agencies can help direct youth to the programs and services that might be useful to them. And I say that in particular because a lot of youth made the point that not all services are tailored sort of to their needs, and they don't necessarily know where to go to organizations to get, occupational specific training or job connections that are particularly relevant to their fields of interest. So a better sort of system of referrals and connections can also help with that. Other youth also shared that service providers should basically connect with them where they are. So in schools, in community agencies, in locations where families receive, settlement services, paid ads on social media, in public spaces like the TTC were also said to be, important for outreach. And then a couple of other things that they had mentioned is that they particularly trust government websites. So if this information is featured on government websites, made accessible in multiple languages, and just raise the visibility of that information on these websites, that it would help reach them better. And then lastly, just for the younger youth, I think one thing that came up in various components of the study is that we need to support parents and build their capacity to also be able to provide career guidance to youth. And this is something that seems to be lacking currently in programming that's employment related, targeted to young people. So those are just sort of some of the tactical things that I think could be done. The last thing I wanted to mention is something that came up both in the service provider workshops and in the workshops with youth, which was around cultural stigmas. So Farzana had mentioned, this idea of services needing to be paid, but we also heard that some youth see seeking help as, a personal failure or an issue of pride. So we might need to shift how we talk about employment-related services, moving away from the notion that they are here to, support or help or assist youth, but rather speaking to them as if they are, tools and ways for us to deliver on a responsibility as a society and at the government level to help facilitate young people's transition, from school to work and facilitate that integration into the Canadian labor market. So just to overcome that stigma of this being some form of handout or support. And I'll stop there.
No, these are great points. And I think as you're talking and also from the presentation, engaging youth in a sense of taking ownership for their own journey and being ambassadors. Once they go through these programs, how do we re-engage those youth to become mentors for other youth? Because lived experiences, speak the loudest and are very appealing to other youth in terms of utilizing the programs and making progress in their life, building a successful career and coming back as mentors. So this is also one of the strategies that proved to be effective in terms of engaging other youth in this programming and giving it the faith. And another aspect is, of course, for us as service providers to build partnerships based on the needs that we identify, because we know from our sector that none of us can really do it alone, and we need to learn more about what else is out there. How can we build these synergies between the different service providers, different service streams, different different supports that address specific needs. And on that note, there is an interesting question for Alma, one of our participants is saying, I noticed that some of the quotes on your slides are from participants with intersectional identities, such as newcomer LGBTQ+ youth. Do you find any differences within the newcomer youth group based on their minority identities?
Definitely, yeah. There were stories that were similar, but there were stories that were different. And this was a couple of them were in this. And so when we talked about, strategizing, finding community was one that, as they arrive into the country, finding that community that will support them. And like I said in my presentation, but that can also be a negative, experience, because it could be a community that are not accepting, so that initial process of finding friendly, communities was very interesting. And so gender issues was something else, like a sub, group of challenges, asset barriers, and things like that. But in general, they were, most of them were having the same struggles, but definitely subgroups in that sense.
Thank you. So again, a common theme, and I think that this is something that came up in Sugi's presentation and in Neda's presentation as well. Newcomer youth tend to not have the skills in highlighting their assets. Perhaps we have it more ingrained in the educational system in Canada, and youth who are coming from other parts of the world need to be more trained in terms of how to present their assets to the world of employment and to the society in general. And this is, again, a theme that can be explored by different service providers together. And the idea is to empower youth, to get them to the right resources, and to enhance our collaboration across the sector. So with this thought, I would like to conclude our presentation today. I apologize if we weren't able to get to all of the questions. You are welcome to post the questions directly to our presenters, and we will do our best to address all of them. And thank you everyone for your attention to our presentation today.